Hey Quilty friends, happy Thursday. I hope that you all are just as excited about this quilt as I am. So if you're just joining me today and you didn't see Monday's video, make sure you do pause the video right now, take a second and go check out Monday's video. What was Monday's video? Why do you need to see it? Well, on Monday, I shared the beginning of this quilt, the basics of loading this quilt onto my long arm quilting machine before I began any machine quilting at all. So if you haven't used a long arm machine before, I just thought it was something fun to share. And if you have, maybe my process, maybe there's something in it that could help you a little bit. So just loading the quilt, kind of going over my design, a little bit of marking, all of that is what I cover in the first video. So then today I'm actually going to show you some of my machine quilting. Now, along those same lines, if you're just joining me today for the first time, you know that Thursdays are a little bit more playful around here, a little bit more fun. We don't take things as serious in these Thursday videos, even though the machine quilting is really serious and hopefully turns out really awesome. We just sometimes think that Thursdays are a day to have fun. So along with me sharing the video today, I also have a giveaway, which we do every single Thursday. What is this week's giveaway? Well, this week I'm actually giving away one of these fun Piece and Quilt t-shirts. So all you have to do to enter this giveaway is leave a comment and tell me, do you like to do free motion quilting or would you prefer to do ruler work? So leave a comment and then we just ask that you share this video. We'll leave the giveaway open for about 24 hours and then we'll announce the winners in the post. So make sure you do that, share the video, and then you'll be entered to win. Okay, so this beautiful quilt was made by my client, Laura, and she sent it to me for some custom machine quilting. Now, she saw the original version of this quilt that I quilted a few years back for Tracy Jacobson. She's the designer of this leaded glass quilt. And she loved it. She loved the way that I had quilted it, everything about it. And it is a gorgeous quilt. I can't blame her for it. So she asked me that if I would machine quilt hers. Similar, but it's not exactly the same. And why isn't it exactly the same? First of all, I have a really hard time quilting two quilts exactly the same. There's just something about being original and unique that I just have to add something extra in there. So on the original version, I quilted pebbles around the whole outside border. And in this one, you're going to see that I did add in a little bit more than just pebbles in that outside border. Obviously, the original had the big feather swag, like I'll show you here, but I just wanted to add a little bit more today. Just my mood, no necessary rhyme or reason to why I did that. Okay, so the basics. I do all of my quilting on a Gammill 22-inch machine. We decided on this quilt because there is a lot going on, and if I change thread colors for every single color that there is on this quilt, you can see just looking at it right now, I would probably be using about 60 different thread colors. So we decided to go with just one thread color, and it's the color number 402, the So Fine 402 thread, and that's what I've used completely across this whole entire quilt top. When you look at the photos of it, when I show you close up, you'll see that it just blends so nicely, and that's one of the reasons why I love this thread so much. Now you can pick up all these products that I mentioned over on my website, pieceandquilt.com. So on my bobbin, I'm using one color again overall, and that color number is 624. It's bottom line thread. The batting that I'm using on this quilt is one layer of the Quilter's Dream wool, and that's really what helps me have such beautiful texture. You know, it's a little bit of a loft, but I don't feel like it's too much loft, and it just quilts out so beautifully. Even with really heavy quilting like I've done on this quilt, it's not super stiff. Like the batting just helps it to relax just a little bit. So I hope that everything I am able to share with you today gives you just a little bit of inspiration on your own machine quilting journey. But if you're still looking for even more inspiration, make sure you do check out my stitch along every single day for a whole entire year, 365 days over on my YouTube channel. I am sharing a block a day teaching you how to machine quilt with one of my machine quilting rulers. So make sure you also check that out. But in the meantime, let's get stitching. Okay, so we're kind of going a little bit backwards here. This image is actually of the quilt after all of the machine quilting is complete. But I think it's kind of nice to be able to see it after it's all complete so that you can kind of understand what I'm quilting as I'm quilting it. So you can see here the beautiful swag feathers in the opposite corners. In all of the background outside border, you can see that I quilted the pebble with some little swirls and that playful feather in there. I love that fun little feather design. Actually, I'll be back on Monday with a little tutorial showing you how to quilt that little motif. So make sure you come back by on Monday. Then in the center of each of the blocks, look really closely, but I will show you this in the video. You can see that in all of the blocks, I've added an inside echo. So it's 1/4 inch on the inside of all of those blocks. By doing that, again, I'm just creating a nice little separator, a nice place for my eye to rest. I've also stitched in the ditch around every single block and then quilted swirls on the insides of those blocks. Then as I move to those center setting blocks, you can see that I quilted a fun melon-shaped design using my 4-in-1 and inside-out rulers there. And we will get to all of that in the video. All right, so hopefully by now you have seen part 1 of this video where I explain everything before I started the quilting, including this marked spine here that I'm obviously not stitching exactly on. All right, so the first thing that I will do here is stitch out some feathers. Now generally, and if you ever have seen any of my machine quilting videos before, you know that I most often start on the left side of the quilt and work my way across the top, work from there, left to right, all the way down the quilt. However, when I show you images of this quilt, when the quilting is all done, and if you saw where I was marking on this quilt, you saw that I'm going to quilt feathers in 2 of the opposite corners. Now, because I am doing that, this first feather is actually in the upper right-hand side of the quilt. So, because of that, I'm going to stitch out this feather very first because I want my background filler that I'm going to stitch in the rest of this border to just nest right up against that feather. So, this time I'm actually starting towards the upper right portion of the quilt and stitching out this fun, playful bump back feather. Now, before we get too much further into this video, I do want to let you know this is totally a longer video where I'm going to go more in depth into my quilting process. And if this is the type of video that you like, if you like this type of inspiration and, you know, kind of picking my brain a little bit more, then do hop on over to my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/Natalia Bonner. Over there, I share multiple videos every month, lots of little tips and tricks, kind of more behind the scenes stuff that I do not share on Facebook that is a lot more educational. So make sure you do check out my Patreon page. All right, so I'll continue on here stitching out these fun bump back feathers. I should also let you know here that I do have a book that goes I teach you how to quilt feathers in it. It's called Visual Guide to Machine Quilting Feathers. In that book and in my online class, I am teaching you exactly how I quilt these feathers. Lots of different designs and lots of inspiration happening over there. So when I do stitch out a feather like this, you notice that I stitched out my spine very first. So my spine is my reference line where my feathers are always going to come back to, as close back to as my spine as I can get. I am by far not a perfect quilter, and I'm okay with the imperfectness of my machine quilting. After I've stitched out one side of those bump back feathers, you'll see here that I will go through now and add an echo line around the outside of the feather. Now this echo isn't something that I stitch on every single feather I quilt, but because I am going to stitch a really heavy background filler containing pebbles, swirls, little tiny motifs, I feel like by adding this echo line around the outside, I'm able to give your eye just a nice place to rest between the feather and then all the busyness that's going to be going on in the background. So something I just like to do, I feel like it also ties the feather together really nicely. And it kind of doubles as my traveling stitch if you didn't notice already. I'm using that to travel from the top of the feather back down to the bottom before starting the feathers on the opposite side. So you'll see here that I've moved on and I am stitching now the feathers on the bottom side of this feather. I'll continue stitching like that all the way across until I get to the top, back up to that top border on my quilt. Once I've got all the way back to the top, then I'll again stitch that echo stitch right down the opposite side, the outside of that feather, all the way back down as far as my throat space will allow me. When I get to that point, I will stitch out a few of the pebbles and swirls and just little motifs there, But generally, because I am more confident quilting from left to right, I feel more comfortable that way. I'll just stitch out a few before moving back over to the left side of the quilt and stitching out the rest of that background filler. So here's just a little peek at that feather, just another angle. You can really see it here, and you can see a few of those pebbles and swirls that I played around with and stitched out down in that bottom portion. So once I've stitched out that feather design, then I'm going to go through and stitch in the ditch, just separating the white from the prints. I really love the look of stitch in the ditch, so you'll see that I do that on every single quilt, well, pretty much every single quilt that I custom machine quilt. To do my stitch in the ditch work, I'll either use my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler or one of my other two rulers, the inside out ruler or the trailer, have little notches on them that actually can help you keep your stitch in the ditch lines nice and straight. Moving on and quilting that fun border background filler design. So you can see here that I'm going to stitch a heavy filler throughout all of this white area. This filler is mostly going to be based on pebbles, so there will be the majority of this design stitched in the pebbles. Now I do walk you step by step through the process of machine quilting these pebbles in my online class, Beginner's Guide to Free Motion Quilting, or my book, Beginner's Guide to Free Motion Quilting. You'll notice that I also add in some fun little swirls and that little feather just to give it a little bit of extra detail. I don't know if it's just me and I'm crazy, but sometimes when I'm quilting just one motif like a pebble all over, I can get a little bit bored. I'll be the first to totally admit that. So by adding in other fillers, not only does it create a lot of fun interest, but also it doesn't ever get boring to me. I feel like, if I start to feel like I'm getting bored or tired of quilting pebbles, then I'll just add something else in, and it creates a lot of fun, interest, and design to my filler that I'm stitching out. So moving on to the blocks, the first thing that I will do is finish the stitching in the ditch around the outside of this block. Now when I look at this quilt, I'm considering every section that's divided off by the white sashing, I'm considering that a block. So I'm stitching in the ditch all the way around that. Then I'm going back through using the edge of my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler. Now, if you haven't seen my ruler videos before or any of that information, I do have several of them, but you do need to make sure that you have a ruler foot on your machine for any ruler work. And because I do so much machine quilting with rulers, I most often just keep my ruler foot on my machine. Obviously, there are times when I take it off and switch it to the other feet, but for this whole entire quilt, I'll just use my ruler foot. So I'll stitch out that inside echo, and like I mentioned, I'm stitching that out just as a little buffer. It's a place for my eye to rest between designs to separate the heavy background filler that's going on in the outside of the quilt from this design, because it is also another very heavy design. After I've stitched that, then I'll stitch those fun swirls on the inside. Now this is another design that I do go step by step into the process of stitching out in my book and online class, Beginner's Guide to Free Motion Quilting. After I've completed all the quilting on that first block, then I'm going to move on and work on one of those setting blocks. So as I quilt a quilt, and this is how I actually quilt, then I'll move on and stitch around the next design, traveling along ditches or anywhere I can travel like that to kind of hide my stitches. But also the less times I have to stop and start, the less times I have to cut my thread, things like that, the happier of a quilter I am. So I'll stitch in the ditch. Because I am stitching kind of a melon type motif in the center of this design, I also stitched in the ditch on each of those 4 seams. Now I'm going to switch and use my inside out and my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler. So you could totally stitch out this design with just one of my rulers, but there are some times when it's just awkward to hold that curve on one side of the machine. So if you switch back and forth between the 2 rulers, it makes it really easy to comfortably hold your hands. The curve on the inside of the 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler and the inside out machine quilting ruler is the exact same. So it's intended that the 2 rulers work together very nicely. You'll notice here that I am stitching out a nice point-to-point melon design, so I'm just working with what's going on here. I'm stitching from the outside to the inside, working my way around the block. Then, because I want to add a little bit of extra detail to this particular design, then I'm adding an echo on the outside, but it's not a true echo. It's a little bit different angle. And I like that. I like the adding in a different angle to create even more interest. You could stitch this out and add markings and different things like that, but I'm pretty good at eyeballing it, so I've chosen to just eyeball, stitch to about the center, keeping my line about 1 inch from the prior stitch point from that inside corner. Then from there, I'll travel on, continue stitching, and then repeat that same process on the next block, stitching in the ditch, and then stitching that inside echo with those swirls on the inside. And here are a few more images of the quilt after I'd completed all of the machine quilting, spritzed away those marked lines, and it's ready for its binding. I hope that you are all able to find a little bit of inspiration from my machine quilting on this beautiful quilt. Like I mentioned earlier, if you do want more inspiration like this, do check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/Natalia Bonner. Over there, like I said, I do share a lot of videos where I go more like this, step by step through my process. I talked to you through my thought process of picking out designs and what to quilt where. So I hope that you can use the information I'm sharing over there to find inspiration for your own quilts. Also, like I said, make sure you come back on Monday and I'm going to show you exactly how I quilt that fun little swirly feather motif. See y'all later.